Hottest seat. We'll go ACC first. And I'm going to steal from you because you mentioned this with Pry versus Florida State, but I think there's an early one that is kind of the same thing, and it's Mike Norvell and Tony Elliott. Florida State plays Alabama week 1, and then they've got 2 cupcakes, East Texas A&M and Kent State. So they'll be 2-1 at worst, I think, hopefully for my mental health, going into Charlottesville. But man, the loser of that game, you look at Florida State's schedule and you say, man, if Norvell loses to on the road at Virginia, where I do think they'll probably be a slight favorite, if they lose on the road at Virginia, they got to play Pittsburgh, they got to play Virginia Tech, they got to go on the road to Raleigh, not to mention they got to play Miami, Florida, and Clemson. It gets pretty tough to see a ton of wins on the schedule if they can't beat Virginia, who I do think is one of the weaker teams in the ACC. They do get Stanford and Wake, which I think they'll win those games. But that Mike Norvell, Tony Elliott game, I think both those coaches are on the hot seat, and I think that's a pretty big one early. The other 2 that I have in the ACC are, you mentioned Brent Pry and Justin Wilcox at Cal. I think those are those would be my top 4 for the ACC.
I'll switch out Justin Wilcox because at this point, I don't feel like he's ever going to get fired. I don't. I've always wondered what is so special about him to where he's getting these job opportunities and they end up going 5-7 or 6-6 every year. So I'm just saying that the Calgorithm is going to keep him out on the West Coast for a while.
2 blokes to fire.
I agree with you that Elliott's on the hot seat, but I'm going to go with Brent Pry as my number 1 option. And the reason I say this is because of you play South Carolina week 1, then you play Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt last year was not expected to be the team that they eventually were. Virginia Tech was expected to be a player in the ACC. 97% returning production. And you got embarrassed at a stadium that was still under construction in overtime against a QB that, as much as I love him to death because of everyone knows my love for Baba Yaga, Diego Pavia, he was not ready to take that step forward. And then you got embarrassed in almost every other major matchup. Well, now your schedule is more challenging. You could start off the season 0-2. That week 5 game against NC State. If you're 2-3 in that moment, you might as well just go ahead and wave the white flag and call it a surrender motion, surrender Cobra out in Blacksburg, because this is what you are as an organization underneath a coach like Brent Pry. I understand he's a great defensive mind, but at some point, you gotta just show results. You failed last year. I don't know if you're going to do it this year, and I refuse to believe in you this year after what happened last season. I'll throw Dave Durant on this list for one reason. At some point, you just get tired of being stuck. Would you rather see progress by getting regressed, by having regression set in, or would you rather see regression be there and eventually you take that next step forward? And NC State, for as long as I can remember, have been a solid team in the ACC. But they've never been viewed as a national championship threat. They've never been viewed as an ACC force that can go win the conference championship. They've never been even viewed as usually a 10-win team during the regular season. And so at some point, you got to ask yourself, if this isn't working, what can we do to make sure that we get to that next level? It just feels like they're kind of in that rock and a hard place of you plateaued. Do we want to start the decline so we can get up to the next part of the mountain?
Big 12, I've got Scott Satterfield at Cincinnati, Willie Fritz at Houston. I know that we talked about them a little bit. If they struggle, and I hate to do it to my guy, but Mike Gundy feels like they've got to win this year. I feel like that's pretty warm there. So those are my top 3 in the Big 12.